In this video, we're going to take a look at some of the basics in setting up an application in Corona. We're going to look at some of the things we've already done, some things that are issues that will come up later, and a couple things that hopefully will help each of you out as you're building your own apps later in the course. Okay, so as you can see on the screen, I've got the main.lua open for an app that it's yet to be named, but the folder that's in is called Apples. And starting at the top is something that we've used for a while, the hide the status bar. Not 100% necessary, but very useful in a lot of instances that we don't want to see that information in our app. Then I've called physics, and you can see this is the same exact code that's listed in the book for using physics. And in this particular application, I'm going to use gravity, but for now, as I'm just setting it up, I don't want to include that, so I comment it out. That's what those two dashes do. It leaves the line of code there, but it tells the computer to ignore it when it is running. Okay, so I got a little comments here. I'm moving down. Now I'm loading in a picture to be my background image. I tell that it's local. I give it a name, which again, this isn't really going to be used anywhere else, so this name isn't overly important. So I just call it BG. Then we've got the display new image command, and in the parentheses, the name of the file. Okay, and as mentioned before, these have to be consistent. You know, bg.png, if I open up my folder where I'm storing this particular program, I see that there is bg.png. Now, since most of you are using Windows, an interesting issue comes up here in that Windows is not case sensitive in its version of Corona. Okay, and that's why for some of you, you'll have code and you'll submit it to me, and I've made comments like this should be the same. Even though it works, when we go to create a build for a finished application, it's going to get kicked out because when Corona converts it either to Apple iOS or into the Android format, those two, the command in the code and the file name don't match, and it can cause problems later. So, you know, for good form now and to hopefully prevent issues later, we want to make sure when you code it, it's exactly the same. Another thing, on the Mac side, apostrophes like this and quotation marks are interchangeable for listing file names. So you see in this particular program, I did not use quotation marks to highlight names and such. I used the apostrophes. It results in the same interpretation by Corona. Okay, then what I've done here is an effort to try to alleviate some of the errors that can come up, especially when you're programming a longer app and you may not be able to test it until much closer to the end of the project. Okay, I've planned out what I want to call my variables that I'm going to use and the functions that I'm going to use later in the app. Again, this is not 100% necessary, but it is good practice. In other programming language, declaring variables is mandatory. Lua, it is not, but it's very helpful. And that's really what I've done here. I'm telling this the simulator that I'm creating several different variable names, all the way from down here to score, up here to title, and it knows that those names now will have meaning. It doesn't know what the meaning is except for this one right here, where it says that the times equals 0. Again, it keeps some errors from happening. And I've done the same thing with functions. Now, you don't always know how many functions and how many variables you're going to need, but sometimes you do. And once you start building from app to app, it's a very useful technique to use similar code. That way, if you perfect something in an earlier program, you can reuse that code later on. So I've got functions here, and really the only difference is we've got this equals and then these empty braces for the functions. In this particular example of code, you can kind of see scroll up a little bit here. I've got one function started. I've given it a name, and in that I have 4 lines. Okay. Now, just going to make sure I have that ended. It is there, but it's off the screen, so you can't see it. Here's my title BAG variable that I created up top. I've got play button, credits button, and then I've created a group called title view. Okay, we just looked at that very briefly, but what this allows us to do is manipulate these 3 variables with one, the group name. So if I wanted to change the location of all of these items at once, all I have to do is a line like this. Title view dot x equals, and then I can either put in a constant like 250, or I can base it off of where it was, something like that, where the title view dot x is going to be 50 more than it was. Okay, this is very nice for keeping locations relative. I've got 3 items here. When I look at that in the simulator, they're all in a particular spot on my screen. If I wanted to keep those distances and things, changing the group's properties will do that. Even though these items are in the group, if I wanted to change them individually, I still can. So like if I wanted my title background to be in a different place, here's its X property, I can just change that individually and it will only affect the title BG object. Okay, so that's just a couple of minor things. And if I wanted to fade this out, like the purpose of this particular function in my program here is to be a title screen. Okay, and when they click on a button, these need to go away. So because they're all part of the display group, I can remove them all with 1 line of code instead of 3. Now that's not a big deal when you're only talking 3 lines of code, but imagine a program where you have a function or hundreds of graphics. That could save you a lot of coding by having them be part of a display group. And with the storyboard and the composer that we've looked at a couple weeks ago, display groups are mandatory for the different functions. That helps the simulator to keep track of what should be showing up on which page, and it doesn't say that verbatim in the book that you must use display groups, but it is pretty much a requirement. I mean, there are ways to get around practically anything, but it's not necessarily the best programming choice, especially when we're learning. So I just want to take a couple minutes here and create a couple of things so that we could be clear on certain issues. This week's project is to create the space shooter game that's listed in chapter 9 of the book. I've sent the image files and a couple of the config files through Blackboard, so you can download that and you just start with the main.lua. If you follow along in the book and put the code in as it's illustrated there, this will work in your simulator. Then to take that one step further, I want you to replace some of the graphics with graphics of your choice. Okay, should be fairly straightforward. All of the code is in the book. That's something a few of you have done it with past examples also, is tried to change up some of the examples from what was listed there, and that in some cases led to some problems. The examples are in there to help you see what the code does and to also have a small code library to draw from. You know, professional programmers rarely start with a blank page. They view the type of project that they're going to create, and then they pull functions, variables from what they've done before. It's very efficient because you've worked out the problems and hopefully all the bugs in a prior program. You know that that function should work. You just have to match up the names. Again, if there's questions, if there's problems with any of the things during the week, please send me an email or go into the discussion board in Blackboard and post a question, and I'll get back to you. Happy coding.